To the best of my knowledge, this is the cheapest ultra-wide full-frame autofocus lens ever made. In fact, the only other autofocus lenses that I could find at a similar focal length cost around $2,000. And this lens costs under $200. It's also one of the smallest and lightest ultra-wide lenses ever made, making it not just the perfect choice for someone on a tight budget, but for anyone who wants to keep their camera setup small and light. Now, I think it is a reasonable question to ask, what are we sacrificing in order to get a lens this small, light, and affordable? And as you might expect, there are some compromises. None of these are deal breakers, and for me, the performance of this lens well and truly exceeds the price point. So I'm going to take you through my standard range of clinical tests, but I'm also going to talk about how the lens performs in more real-world situations, giving you a bit better guidance if this might be the right lens for you. At the time of shooting this video, I believe the lens is going to be available on 2 different mounts with more to come. I'll put some links in the description down below to the current lens mounts and the best pricing I could find. And if I have any discount codes, they'll be down there as well. When the new lens mounts are released, those links should automatically update with any additional lens mounts. This is the Viltrox 14mm f4 full frame lens. In full disclosure, Viltrox did send this lens out to me at no cost to myself, but this is not a paid video and they've had no say in the making of the video. Now, when I think about a 14mm focal length on a full frame camera, there's a few things that come to mind. And the first thing is architecture in real estate. Now, when it comes to video or walkthrough video for real estate, you're going to get that wraparound image where you feel like you are immersed in the environment. And those things at the side of frame feel like they're going right by the side of your head as they are moving through the house or moving through the property with a gimbal. And for architecture, whether it be photo or video, you're going to get that very much wraparound image. You're also going to be able to put the person in the scene, make them feel like they are part of the environment, because ultra-wide angle lenses tend to suck us in and feel like we are there and we can see everything around us. And you'll often hear people talk about a 50mm lens being what the human eye can see, or a 35mm lens being what the human eye can see. But ultra-wide angle lenses like this that give you a wraparound image are definitely giving you a more immersive feeling, very similar to being there in real life, unlike a 50 or 35mm lens. In addition to that, this is going to be a great landscape lens. Now, it's not going to be a far mountain off in the distance landscape. Ultra-wide angle lenses are great for 2 things. One, a wraparound environment where you are immersed in the landscape. That's going to be in a canyon or a cave or a forest where you can feel everything wrapping around you. The other is situations where you have interesting foreground elements and you can tip the lens down and those interesting foreground elements become very prominent, and maybe something large off in the distance is just a second focal point. The other thing this lens is going to be great for is vlogging. Now, that could be on YouTube or just family travel or just documenting your journeys. An ultra-wide lens like this is going to allow you to put a person, or held at arm's length, have yourself in a scene, but you're going to get this huge wraparound environment. This just helps tell the visual story, and it makes the viewer feel like they are more there in the environment. One thing you do have to be aware of with a 15mm focal length is as you get it closer to your subject, you are going to get more and more distortion. So even though you get an ultra-wide angle field of view and you can fit more in, often the best images or the most natural images are from holding it as far as you can away from yourself and not getting it too close to your face where you'll get some weird distortion. The other thing that this lens is going to be great for is the creative use of perspective distortion. And perspective distortion is when you get an object in frame and it is very close to the lens, and that object seems larger and prominent than the things in the background. So as you get closer to an object, it's going to seem bigger and bigger, and everything behind it is going to be pushed away in almost a surreal or somewhat unnatural look. This is called perspective distortion. It's not a fault of the lens. It's just something that you get when you have lenses that have an ultra wide field of view, which you can use creatively to make some really cool dramatic images. And mastering ultra wide lenses in a lot of cases is really just mastering the art of composing with perspective distortion. Now, looking at the lens itself, it is an all plastic lens. It does have a polished metal lens mount, and it does have a USB-C port for updating the the firmware. It does come with a plastic lens hood, and it comes with a clip-on plastic rear and front lens cap. But overall, the build quality on the lens, it doesn't feel cheap by any means, but it doesn't feel premium either. This is part of the Viltrox Air series, and they're all made in a very similar form factor. I think they probably are using the identical body across all of them to save money. But the beauty of it is you get a lens that is very small and light. You still have a manual focus ring, which works quite well and is well dampened. And overall, I would say the build quality is similar to most manufacturers' entry-level nifty 50s or kit lenses. Once again, not premium by any means, but doesn't feel like junk either. Looking at the optical test and starting with distortion, if you turn off in-camera corrections and you don't correct in editing, you will get some moderate barrel distortion. But if you turn on the in-camera corrections, in my Sony camera, it corrected the distortion perfectly. And in Lightroom, it was very, very easy to correct. So you're not going to have to worry about distortion. The moderate barrel distortion is there, but it is easily corrected. Looking at vignette, starting from f4, we have noticeable vignette, but less than I kind of expected for a lens of this width and size. As we stop down to f5.6, it improves a little. At f8, it improves again, but you can stop all the way down to f11 or f16 and the vignette never goes away. But once again, if you turn on in-camera corrections, it corrects this almost perfectly, and it's nothing I would worry about. Also very easy to correct in Lightroom or in editing. Looking at chromatic aberration, this is where we kind of have a two-speed performance. If you put the lens into extreme situations, which is generally backlit trees or backlit branches by the sun, and you overexpose the sky, there is noticeable chromatic aberration and purple fringing. Now, this is not unusual. I have lenses that cost thousands of dollars that have very similar performance. But what I did find is in most real-world situations, even shooting a black and white test chart, there was absolutely nothing to worry about. So in a number of real-world situations, you will not have any problems. But if you do have a strongly backlit scene, particularly branches on trees with sunshine coming from behind, and you overexpose your image or you blow out the highlights in the sky, you will notice some purple fringing in those images. Looking at longitudinal chromatic aberration, which is a change in color cast in the out of focus areas before and after the plane of focus. If you shoot it on a test chart, I did find some, but in real world use, there was little to none, and I didn't find it to be an issue in any of my real world images. Looking at the flare performance, it's a bit of a mixed bag because the lens does control flare pretty well, but in some situations it flares quite significantly. But importantly, I don't find the images lose contrast or become desaturated. You just get some very interesting lens flares in your images. Now, this is all going to be personal preference, and this is far from what I would call a clinical flare performance, but I don't necessarily think it's bad either. And in some situations, I think it creates a really interesting creative image, and it's something I would probably lean into knowing the way that this lens flares. I probably find myself capturing images where I try to include that flare in the composition of the image because I do think it looks pretty cool. The other thing that was a bit of a surprise to me is this lens produces some really interesting and prominent sun stars right from f4. And I think that has something to do with the aperture, which is a 7-sided or 7-bladed aperture. And I don't know if that's intentional or not. It seems like it might be, but the sun stars coming out of this thing were really cool and super interesting and a little bit of a surprise package, something I don't usually talk about when I do the lens reviews, but they are quite prominent, and it's definitely something that you could use creatively in your images. Looking at the close-up image quality, I was shocked by how close the lens could get. It could get exceptionally close. And the first time I was doing a few close-up images, I kept moving closer and closer and closer, and I'm like, I couldn't believe it was still focusing. So I think it's going to be a great lens for creating those really interesting close focus images, which ultra-wide lenses allow you to get that thing really close to the frame, detailed in focus, and then push the background away and create this almost surreal looking image from it. So minimum focus distance is great, and the sharpness is excellent as well. Looking at sharpness and starting in the center of frame at f4, it is very sharp. Stop it down to f5.6 and it's about the same. And even at f8, it doesn't really get any sharper because it is very sharp right from f4. Once you stop down to f11, a little bit of diffraction creeps in. It starts to get softer. And at f16, it is noticeably softer. Looking at the corner frame and starting at f4, the extreme corners are a little bit soft, but if you move in just a little bit, then they are much cleaner and quite sharp. There is a little bit of a hint of chromatic aberration in the corners as well. Stop it down to f5.6 and they are noticeably sharper, and I think the sharpness is excellent. At f8, it is near perfect, and at f11 and f16, diffraction starts to creep in and the image gets a little bit softer. Now, looking at bokeh, if we're talking about a lens that is a 15mm full frame f4 lens, bokeh is really not something that you think too much about with this lens, and it's not something that you're really going to get unless you get reasonably close to a subject and use that minimum focus distance. But when you do get an out of focus area, I would say it is a bit mixed. The general out of focus area is okay, but in some situations it can get a bit busy and distracting. So I don't think the general out of focus areas are the best I've seen, but it's not something that I would really worry about or be a deal breaker for this lens. The other thing that's interesting is when we look at the bokeh or specular highlights in out of focus areas, what you're going to find is there is a 7-sided bokeh ball. I don't think we would maybe call it a ball anymore. It's heptagonal, I think is the word. And that is because there is a 7-bladed or 7-sided aperture which creates this shape. Now, this is really unusual and interesting, and in some situations looks very cool. I've actually seen cinema lenses that have this geometric shape, which is an intentional part of cinema lenses that cost $30,000 or $40,000. These are going to have a shape to them, even wide open. So I think it is a very interesting sort of bokeh or out of focus area, but this is really all going to be a matter of personal preference. I think if you want a small, lightweight, and affordable ultra-wide full-frame lens, to me, this lens is a no-brainer. And there's really nothing like it on the market. Optically, it's not perfect, but it's still very good. And while you can get bigger, more optically perfect lenses at this focal length, if they have autofocus, they generally cost 10 times the price and are enormous. So if you've got a constrained budget or you want a small ultra-wide full-frame lens, not only is this lens a good option, it's really the only option. Now, if you're in the market for some ultra budget full frame lenses, I've just thrown a video on screen now that is 11 full frame lenses from under $100. And if you're looking for a new lens for a bit of fun or just to spark your creativity, I would definitely check out that video.